And I see a few questions addressed to the last presenters. One is to Professor Introvigne. The question is, you mentioned persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses in China. I understand that China has an official list of evil, so-called evil cults that are illegal, and the Jehovah's Witnesses are not included in the list. So I try to see the rest of. So why are they prosecuted? Can you please answer?
Yes, the question is right. Actually, in China, there are 3 different legal situations for religion. Only 5 are allowed, including a state-controlled Protestant church called the Three Self Church, where all the Protestants are supposed to participate. Then there are religions in a gray area. They are not allowed, they are technically legal, but sometimes tolerated or not tolerated, although recently not tolerated. And then there are the groups labeled as Sejao, which sometimes is translated as evil cults, but is really more heterodox teachings, a label which has existed since the late Ming era, and participate in any activities of the Sejao, which are the lowest possible level of religion in China, is a crime, and you are sentenced under Article 300 now of the Criminal Code. Now, your question focuses on this strange situation. There is an official list of the Sejao. Are the Jehovah's Witnesses included in the list of the Sejao? The answer is no. But in June this year, 18 Jehovah's Witnesses have been sentenced to heavy jail penalties in Xinjiang, applying Article 300. So they have been considered as members of a Sejao, even if they are not listed as a Sejao. Why is this possible? Well, one politically can call the attention on the fact that this happened in Xinjiang, where authorities are already very much nervous about religion, not because of the Jehovah's Witnesses, but because of the Muslims. Another political reason is there is a crackdown on religion in China in the last few years in general. A third reason Gordon Melton mentioned it, answering a previous questions, is just like in Russia, in China, the Jehovah's Witnesses are seen as American because they have their headquarters in the US, and now being connected with United States, it's not seen as something very good or positive in China. But surely Article 300 now tends to be applied by way of analogy also to groups which are not in the list. And in the terms of my speech, I believe these groups are prosecuted because they contest the sacralization of the state. There is a recent book by Michael Walsh, published by Columbia University Press, called Stating the Sacred in China. And it's a word play. Stating means affirming, but also means that the state is sacralized. Increasingly under Xi Jinping, but in reality, even before, the state is something sacred. The emblem of the Communist Party is sacred. You should pay your respect to it. The flag of China, which includes, of course, a reference to communism, is sacred. You are supposed to take off your hat when you see the flag. And the Jehovah's Witnesses don't do these things. So once again is the old conflict between the radical priority of religious sacralization among the Jehovah's Witnesses and the sacralization of the state. And we have no time to discuss this here, but I believe the whole story of the Sejao, why some groups are branded as Sejao in China. There is a book by a Chinese scholar called Wu, recently published in English by Brill in the Netherlands, which tells this story. You are a Sejao if you are perceived as contesting the sacredness of the state, and that started in imperial times and continued in republican times. Even in Taiwan, some groups were targeted until recently. Taiwan being the heir of the nationalist Chinese Republic, and certainly continues in communist China. So if you don't recognize that the state and the Communist Party are sacred, you are listed as Sejao. So for whatever reason, the Jehovah's Witnesses were not included in the list, but that may have been an omission or a mistake, or perhaps they were regarded as small. But certainly with their attitude of absolute independence from the sacralization of the state, the Jehovah's Witnesses correspond to the idea the Chinese Communist Party as a Sejao. So prosecuting them as a Sejao may be illegal because they are not in the list, but is not surprising.
Thank you very much, Massimo. Thank you. I have another question for Holy Fall. Can you, also. The statistics show that there are many religious organizations where child abuse happens. Yet it seems the media are interested only in two of them, the Roman Catholic Church and the Jehovah's Witnesses, and perhaps some small groups regarded as cults. Why is this happening? Are Catholics and witnesses popular because their values are different from those promoted by mainline liberal media, or are there other reasons? Please.
I don't have, hello everybody, hi. I don't have an answer. I don't know. I have a couple of ideas that I think might really account for what's going on. One is that the scrupulousness of the Jehovah's Witnesses in terms of monitoring personal behavior has created a larger paper trail than in some religious traditions. And that creates, I think, a greater speculation that there's civil liability possible. And so in that sense, I think that this is a convergence of some large legal interests who see the Jehovah's Witnesses as a source of money. There are law firms in many countries right now that are issuing basically an open call for complaints, which I think is very unfortunate. I feel in some ways it violates the basic principle of religious freedom, that individual religions should not be targeted gratuitously. And I also think it sort of fits into the way that modern society seems to be handling sexual assault and family abuse and an awful lot of unsavory problems that we're facing. And that is, it's very easy to deflect and to identify these problems and associate them with groups that we already dislike or see as other or different from us. And so in other words, if we can displace the problem of sexual abuse over to becoming a religious problem against a religion where there's already international bias, it's easy to ignore the elephant in the room, which is the fact that sexual abuse is rife through societies around the world. And I see in that sense the campaign against the Jehovah's Witnesses being part of an international apathy that has resulted in the continuation of abuse. So that would be my answer.
Thank you, Holly. I have two remaining questions for the Professor Richardson. I hope he is still here with us. One of the questions is, considering the impressive number of legal victories obtained by Jehovah's Witnesses in US, Canada, and Europe, would it be fair to say that Jehovah's Witnesses are the religion that has contributed the most to religious freedom in the last century? The floor is yours.
Well, I think the data speak for themselves in that regard. I've been interested, as some of you know, I'm a lawyer by background, as is Massimo and some others, but I became fascinated learning about the witness record in America, where they won over 50 Supreme Court cases. And then I learned about what happened in Canada. And post-World War II, this unbelievable record that they've achieved in the European Court of Human Rights is indeed very impressive. So there are some other religious groups, Scientology being one of them, that has a great prowess in the legal arena and lots of experience. But I don't personally think any group compares even close to the record that the witnesses have achieved. It is worth noting that there has to be a certain kind of society, and I've written about that in other places, as some of you might know. The witnesses didn't fare too well when they tried to defend themselves during the Nazi era, and in fact they ended up in concentration camps. The courts were not welcoming, but in societies that do have an independent judiciary and constitutional or statutory provisions protecting religious freedom. And also it's worth noting in societies where the courts themselves are trying to establish their authority, and that was certainly the case in America and Canada and European Court of Human Rights, particularly after the fall of the Soviet Union and all those new countries wanted to join, new countries that did not have a history of religious freedom and indeed stifled religious development in many ways. When situations like that developed, where there were legal systems where they could try to defend themselves and promote religious freedom in general for all other groups, they've done that very successfully. So I don't think there's any religious group that compares even close with the record they've achieved. It is indeed impressive. I apologize for joining late, but I was sleeping. The 10-hour time difference makes it a bit problematic for me.
Entirely understandable, it's really. So, but there is another one, and the last question that they have for participants, and that is the question to Professor Richardson again. And the question is, what the international, because we were talking about Russia and that Russia ignores the decisions of Council of Europe and the European Council of Human Rights. And the question is, what your international community can do if Russia is blatantly ignoring these decisions?
Well, we're going to find out. I anticipate that the European Court of Human Rights must rule against Russia in virtually all of the 57 cases that are currently before it. I also think it's obvious that the court is stalling. Some of those cases have been before the court for 6 years or even longer. Because nobody knows what's going to happen. If what's happened to date when Russia loses these cases before the court, the religion cases, and we've documented that in some other writings, they've lost a significant number of cases unanimously, strongly worded decisions in the European Court of Human Rights. And what basically happens is they pay the fine that the court administers, but refuses to change the law or to implement any new provisions of law that would deal with the problem that exists. If they continue to do that, then the Council of Europe will be forced eventually to figure out what they're going to do. Can they allow a member state to continue to ignore the rulings of the court and refuse to abide by the provisions that they agreed to when they were invited to join the Council of Europe, to implement court decisions and to change their statutes to comport with these rulings when they lose a case. So the Council of Europe is having its bluff called by, I hope it's not a bluff, but it probably is. They're having their bluff called by Russia as Russia refuses to abide by these decisions. So how this will work out, no one really knows. You could make some guesses. Some think that Russia will continue to pay the fines and ignore, and the Council of Europe will continue to ignore the fact that Russia is ignoring the real impact of these rulings. But there's lots of lots of potential. It'll be interesting to see what the Council of Europe looks like in 3 or 4 or 5 years if Russia continues this kind of activity.
Thank you so much, Professor Richardson. Thank you for all the participants in this panel.